The day my daughter tried to have me declared not of sound mind, I didn't fight it. I sat in my own living room in the chair Sonny bought me for our 40th anniversary, and I let her talk. I let her friend the doctor ask me what year it was and who the president was and whether I knew where I kept my checkbook. I answered slow. I let a little confusion creep into my voice. I let her think she'd won. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about being a 67-year-old widow. The moment people decide you're helpless, they stop watching you. And a woman they've stopped watching can move a whole lot faster than one they haven't. My name is Phoebe Ellison. For 40 years, my husband and I built something out of nothing on the south side of Chicago building by building brick by brick, while people who wore nicer shoes than us laughed at the neighborhood we bet on. When Sonny passed, that something was worth more than $5 million. And 3 weeks after we buried him, my own daughter slid a stack of papers across my kitchen table and told me, "Just sign where the little flags are, Mama. It's just to make things easier." I signed. God help me, I signed. But my daughter forgot one thing. Cornelius Ellison never left a room without checking the locks. He checked the stove twice every night of his life. And it turns out he never left this world without checking mine either. So before you decide this is a sad story about a foolish old woman who got taken, let me tell you how it really went. They read the will. I wrote the ending. Comment where you're watching from and stay with me, because what my husband did 5 years before he died is the part nobody, not even me, saw coming. Let me take you back, because you can't understand what my daughter did unless you understand what she did it to. I met Cornelius Ellison in 1976 at a fish fry in a church basement on 43rd Street. Everybody called him Sonny. He was an electrician, quiet hands, quiet man, the kind who'd fix your grandmother's porch light and refuse to take $1 for it. I was a nursing student then, working night shifts at Provident, coming home smelling like antiseptic with my feet swollen up like 2 loaves of bread. We didn't have anything. That's not a figure of speech. We had a rented room, a hot plate, and about $400 between us that we kept in a coffee can behind the flour. In 1978, we spent every cent of that coffee can plus a loan from Sonny's uncle on a burned-out 3-flat on Martin Luther King Drive. Everybody thought we'd lost our minds. The neighborhood was hurting back then, boarded windows, empty lots. Banks that would sooner set their money on fire than lend it to a young black couple on the south side. But Sonny walked through that wreck of a building, running his hand along the studs, and he said, "Phoebe, they're not making any more land in Bronzeville, and one day everybody's going to want back in." He rewired it himself, nights and weekends. I patched plaster and painted with a baby on my hip. We rented out the 2 units we weren't living in, and we took every dollar of profit, and we did it again and again. A building at a time. It took us the better part of 40 years. By the time Sonny got sick, Ellison Properties was 4 buildings, 3 apartment houses on King Drive, and a commercial building down on 47th, with a barber shop and a soul food spot on the ground floor. On paper, it was worth more than $5 million. But I want you to hear me, we never once ran it like it was worth $5 million. We kept the rents fair, on purpose. When the whole neighborhood started coming back, the way Sonny always said it would when the coffee shops moved in and the developers started circling our block like hawks, we watched other landlords double the rent overnight and push out families who'd lived there 30 years. We didn't do that. We couldn't, because those weren't tenants to us. That was Miss Odessa in 2C, who'd been there since Reagan, who lost her husband the same year I lost my mother. When her arthritis got bad and she fell behind, I marked her rent paid in the book and never said a word to her about it. Sonny knew. Sonny did the same thing in his own quiet way for half the building. "Our people stay housed," he used to say. That was the whole philosophy. That was the empire, keeping our people housed. Every Sunday I cooked. Not for my family, well, for them too, but for the building. A pot of greens, a pan of cornbread, whatever I had set out on the landing, so anybody having a hard week could fix a plate and not have to ask. I knew every child in those buildings by name. I knew which ones had asthma and which ones were headed to college. That was my life's real work. The nursing paid the bills. The buildings built the future. But the Sunday pot, that was who I was. Now my children. I had 2. Dexter came first. He's 41 now, lives down in Atlanta, works in something with computers that he's explained to me 9 times, and I still couldn't tell you what it is. Dexter's a good boy, but he learned early that the easiest way to avoid a hard conversation is to be 4 states away from it. He calls on Sundays. He sends money when there's a problem, like money is a thing you can mail instead of showing up. I never held it against him. Some people love you from a distance because up close feels like too much to lose. And then there's Renata, my baby girl. 44 years old, sharp as a tack, beautiful like her father, and afraid of being poor in a way I never could cure her of. That's the thing about giving your children more than you had. Dexter and Renata grew up in a paid-for house, with the buildings already standing, with a mother who never once let them see the coffee can behind the flour. They never watched us count pennies. So they never learned that money is something you build. To Renata, money was just something that was supposed to be there, like the lights coming on when you flip the switch. And somewhere in her heart, the little girl who never went without grew into a woman who was terrified, absolutely terrified of the day the switch might not work. She became a real estate agent. Good one, too. But she married Gerald Boyd, and Gerald had big dreams and small follow-through, a restaurant here, a franchise there. Always one deal away from the thing that was finally going to make them. I loved Gerald. I want you to know that for later. I loved him even when I could see the 2 of them sinking into something they were too proud to name out loud. And then there was Imani, my granddaughter. Renata's girl, 23 years old, in her first year of law school, and the only person in 3 generations of this family who ever sat down at my kitchen table and asked me the right question. She was maybe 19, home from college, and she said, "Grandma, how do you keep the rents that low and still stay out of the red? That doesn't math." And I laughed, and I pulled out the ledgers, the real ones, the ones Sonny kept in his careful little handwriting, and I showed her. How you carry a good tenant through a bad year. How you fix the roof before it leaks instead of after. How you buy when everyone's selling and hold when everyone's buying. She stayed at that table 3 hours. Remember her. She matters more than anyone knows yet. That was my family. That was what we built. Now let me tell you about the paper. Sonny was a man who believed in paper the way some men believe in God. "Paper outlives people, Phoebe," he'd tell me. "A handshake dies with the man who shook it. But you keep the paper right, and the paper protects you long after you're gone. Every deed, every insurance policy, every tax return going back to 1979, he had it all filed and labeled in a gray metal cabinet in the back office that he kept locked. I used to tease him about it. I'd say, 'Sonny, you love that filing cabinet more than you love me.' And he'd say, 'Woman, that filing cabinet is how I love you.' I didn't understand what he meant. Not really. Not for years. Because in the spring of 2020, right when the world was shutting its doors, when everybody was scared and nobody was thinking straight, Sonny sat me down at that same kitchen table where Renata would later ruin everything, and he put a stack of papers in front of me. Thick ones. Legal ones with a lawyer's letterhead and a notary's seal. 'What's all this?' I asked him. 'Protection,' he said, 'for you, in case I go first. Just sign where I marked it, baby. It's handled.' And do you know what I did? I signed. Every page. I didn't read a single word, because he was my husband, and in 40 years that man had never once steered me wrong. And when someone you trust that deeply hands you a pen, you sign. That's not foolishness. That's love. That's what love looks like after 40 years. It looks like signing without reading. I put it out of my mind completely. I never thought about those papers again. Remember that too, because that same reflex, that same signing without reading, that same trusting a familiar hand, that is exactly what my daughter used to try to take everything from me 4 years later. The very same key. It's just that Sonny used his copy to lock the door, and I handed mine to Renata. Sonny got his diagnosis in the fall of 2023, pancreatic. By the time they found it, there wasn't much anybody could do but make him comfortable and let me hold his hand. I nursed him myself the last 5 months, me the retired nurse back on duty for the only patient that ever mattered. He passed in March of 2024 in our bed in the morning with the window cracked because he always liked to hear the neighborhood waking up. We buried him on a Tuesday. The church was so full people stood in the street. Miss Odessa, 91 years old, made her grandson drive her 2 hours to be there. That's the kind of man Sonny was. That's the kind of man they were burying. And I want you to understand my state of mind in those first weeks, because it matters for everything that comes next. I wasn't thinking about money. I wasn't thinking about buildings or trusts or paper. I was a woman who had lost the other half of herself after 45 years, and I was moving through my own house like a ghost, forgetting whether I'd eaten finding his coffee cup and having to sit down on the floor. I trusted that everything was handled. Sonny handled things. Sonny always handled things. That's the exact moment my daughter chose. 3 weeks in, when I was at my lowest, my softest, my most trusting. That's when Renata walked into my kitchen with a folder under her arm and a gentle smile on her face and said the words that started all of it. "Mama, we need to talk about the paperwork." She set the folder on the kitchen table and sat down across from me in Sonny's chair. I remember noticing that. I remember thinking she shouldn't sit there and then feeling ashamed for thinking it, because grief makes you superstitious about the smallest things. Renata had that voice on. The soft one, the one she used with difficult clients and difficult children. "I've been talking to a financial advisor," she said. "Mr. Fairmont. He goes to Gerald's mother's church. He's wonderful, Mama. He handles estates like this all the time, and he says the worst thing we can do right now is let everything sit in limbo. There are deadlines, tax things. If we don't get ahead of it, the county can freeze the accounts, and then you can't even pay the light bill on the buildings." I didn't know if any of that was true. I still don't entirely, but I was 3 weeks a widow. I had a folder of condolence cards I hadn't opened. I had a voicemail from Sonny I couldn't bring myself to delete. And my daughter was sitting in front of me, saying she'd handle it the way her father used to say he'd handle it. She opened the folder. She'd put little colored flags on the pages, the sticky kind, right at the signature lines. Pink and yellow and green, cheerful as a birthday card. "This one just lets me help you with the day-to-day," she said, sliding the first one over. "So I can pay the vendor's deal with the bank, all the boring stuff, without dragging you into it every week. And this one, another page, another flag, just updates Daddy's trust so it's current. Nothing changes, really. It's housekeeping." Housekeeping. That was the word she used. I looked at the top of the first page. I saw the words "durable power of attorney" in bold letters. I didn't know exactly what that meant, but I knew it was serious, and I opened my mouth to ask, and Renata reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "Mama," she said, and her eyes filled up right on cue. "Let me carry some of this. Please, you carried all of us your whole life. Let me carry this one thing." And I want you to understand that was the perfect thing to say, because it wasn't about the paper anymore. It was about being a mother who'd finally raised a daughter who wanted to give back. It was the thing I'd prayed for, my child stepping up. So I signed, where the pink flag was and the yellow and the green. I signed a durable power of attorney that made my daughter, my legal voice, effective that very day. I signed an amendment to Sonny's living trust that quietly made Renata the sole successor, trustee, cutting out Dexter, cutting out my grandchildren, cutting out everyone but her. I signed away the locks on the front half of everything Sonny and I spent 40 years building, and I did it the same way I'd signed those papers Sonny gave me in 2020, without reading a word, trusting the hand that held the pen. Renata gathered up the folder, kissed my forehead, told me she loved me, and left. I felt lighter. Can you believe that? For the first time in 3 weeks, I felt like somebody had my back. 7 months. That's how long I lived in that lightness, not knowing. Looking back now, there were signs the way there always are. Renata started coming by less. When she did come, she seemed thin and jumpy, checking her phone under the table. Gerald stopped coming at all. I heard from a woman at church that their restaurant on 63rd had closed its doors, and I made a note to ask Renata if they were all right. And then I forgot, because grief eats your memory, like a moth eats wool, one small hole at a time. I told myself the distance was just life. Everybody's busy. Everybody's got their own. I found out the truth in November. And I found it out by accident, which I've come to believe is the only way you ever find out the things people work hardest to hide. It was a Tuesday. My phone rang and it was Mr. Hector Ruiz, who'd been plumbing my buildings for going on 20 years, who I'd fed at that Sunday landing more times than either of us could count. And his voice was strange. Careful. "Mrs. Ellison," he said, "I don't want to make trouble, but I got to the 47th Street building this morning for the boiler like always, and there was a man there. From some management company. Cornerstone something. He told me my services weren't needed anymore, that they had their own people now." He paused. "And Mrs. Ellison, the barber shop downstairs. Terrell, you know Terrell, he says they sent him a new lease. They're raising him 40%. He's been there 11 years. He's talking about closing." I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, and I felt something go very cold and very still in my chest, because I hadn't hired a management company. I hadn't raised anybody's rent. I hadn't touched that building since Sonny died. In my mind, everything was exactly where we'd left it. "Mr. Ruiz," I said, "I'm going to look into it. Don't you go anywhere. You still work for me." Then I got in my car and I drove downtown to the Cook County Recorder of Deeds. Now, most people don't know this, but property records are public. Every deed, every mortgage, every lien on every building in this county is written down where anybody can walk in and read it. Sonny taught me that. "The paper's all public, Phoebe," he used to say. People forget that. They think because a thing is written down official, it's hidden. It's the opposite. Official means anybody can find it if they know to look. I knew to look. I sat at one of those public terminals with a young clerk helping me, and I pulled up the record on the 47th Street building. And there it was, recorded in September of 2024, 2 months before that morning. A new mortgage. A cash-out refinance. $850,000 pulled out of the building Sonny and I owned free and clear. And down at the bottom on the signature line, it did not say Phoebe Ellison. It said Renata Ellison Boyd as agent under durable power of attorney for Phoebe Ellison. That piece of paper I signed at my kitchen table with the cheerful little flags that was the key. Not the trust amendment, not some far-off inheritance she'd collect when I died. The power of attorney. The one that took effect that very day. She hadn't waited for me to be gone. She'd used it while I was alive and grieving and lighter than I'd felt in weeks, to walk into a bank, sign my name with her hand, and pull $850,000 out of the wall. Sonny and I built one brick at a time. The money was gone, already withdrawn, already spent or hidden or both. I sat in that county building for a long time. Then I went out to the parking garage and I got in my car and I did not cry. I want to be honest with you because this is the part that matters. I wanted to. There was a scream sitting in my throat the size of a fist. My whole body wanted to fold up over that steering wheel and come apart. My daughter, the baby I nursed. The girl I put through college working doubles the child I would have laid down in traffic, for my daughter had forged a life out of my grief. Had looked me in my wet eyes and said, "Let me carry this," and then robbed me while my back was turned. And I started to understand who else knew. Gerald knew you don't move $850,000 through a household and have the other half not know. Dexter, I'd learned later, had heard something secondhand from Atlanta and told himself Mom must have agreed to it. It's not my business. Distance again. Love from 4 states away, which is another word for not looking. Only Imani off at her law school knew nothing at all. Not yet. So there I was, alone in a parking garage, 67 years old, robbed by my own child with the people who should have protected me either in on it or looking the other way. And here is where a different woman breaks. Here is where the story you were expecting goes the sad old widow taken for everything left with her memories. But I didn't hear Renata's voice in that car. I heard Sonny's. Keep the paper right, Phoebe. The paper protects you long after I'm gone. And I thought Sonny gave me papers, too. In 2020, a whole thick stack of them with a lawyer's seal that I signed without reading and never thought about again. What was in those papers? I didn't know. But I knew my husband. I knew the man who checked the stove twice and loved me through a filing cabinet. And I knew sitting in that concrete garage with my hands finally steady on the wheel that Cornelius Ellison had not spent his last healthy years handing me legal documents for no reason. I put the car in reverse. I had stopped being a widow somewhere in that parking garage. I'd become something else. Something my daughter never saw coming because she'd already decided I was too old and too broken to be worth watching. My daughter forged a future out of my grief, so I stopped grieving. I started reading. The first decision I made was the hardest one, and it went against everything in me. I decided to let them keep thinking they'd won. Here's what I understood sitting in that car. The moment Renata knew I'd found the refinance, she would move faster. She'd hide the money deeper. She'd lawyer up, and worst of all, she'd start watching me again. Right now, she wasn't watching. In her mind, I was a grieving old woman shuffling around a too-big house, no threat to anybody. That blindness was the only advantage I had, and a smart woman does not throw away her only advantage to feel the momentary relief of yelling at somebody. So I did something that cost me more than the $850,000. I called Renata that very night, and I made my voice small and warm, and I said, "Baby, thank you for handling everything. I don't know what I'd do without you. My mind's just not what it was." And I heard the relief in her breath. I heard her decide all over again that her mother was harmless. Then I hung up and I got to work. The next morning I did not go to the police, and I'll tell you why. What Renata had done sat in that ugly gray area between a family matter and a crime, and I had learned a long time ago as a black woman on the South Side that when you hand your family's mess to people with badges, you rarely get justice. You just get a different kind of loss. No, if I was going to fight on paper, I needed my own paper person first. I found Vivian Pruitt through Loretta. Loretta Geary has been my best friend since 1981, and she is the only living soul I told the truth to in those first weeks. I sat at her kitchen table and I laid it all out, and Loretta didn't gasp and she didn't cluck her tongue. She got up, poured us both something brown, and said, "Phoebe, you don't need a shoulder. You need a shark. And I know one." Vivian Pruitt was an estate attorney in her 50s, sharp-eyed with an office full of law books, and not one single decorative thing. I liked her immediately. I laid the recorded refinance on her desk, and I told her everything. The folder, the flags, the little word housekeeping. She read it all without a change in her face. Then she took off her glasses. "Mrs. Ellison," she said, "I'm going to tell you the good news and the bad news, and you're going to feel both of them at once. The good news is that a durable power of attorney can be revoked. As long as you are competent, and you are plainly competent, you can cancel her authority tomorrow. She cannot sign one more thing in your name. The trust amendment that made her sole successor trustee, because your husband's living trust is revocable, you can amend it right back. Restore your son. Restore your grandchildren. Cut her out entirely." I felt the first real breath I'd taken in a day. "Now the bad news," Vivian said. "That $850,000 is already gone. Revoking the power of attorney stops the bleeding going forward. It does not put the blood back. To recover what she took, we have to prove she breached her fiduciary duty, that she used her authority to enrich herself instead of acting in your interest, and we have to sue her for it. Your own daughter. In open court. Are you prepared for that?" I said, "Ask me again when I know how deep it goes." Vivian smiled a little, the first crack in that professional face. "Then let's find out how deep it goes." And she asked me a question that seemed simple at the time, and turned out to be the most important question anybody asked in this whole story. "Mrs. Ellison, are you certain that all of your real estate is inside this one revocable trust? All 4 buildings?" And I opened my mouth to say yes, of course, and then I stopped, because I didn't know. Sonny handled the paper. Sonny always handled the paper. I knew the buildings were ours. I did not know page by page, deed by deed, how they were held. And I remembered the 2020 papers. The thick stack with the lawyer's seal that he'd slid across my kitchen table and I'd signed without reading. "There were some documents," I said slowly. "In 2020. My husband had me sign them. He said they were for my protection. I never read them. I don't even know where they are." Vivian went still in a way I'd come to recognize meant she'd caught a scent. "Then before we do anything else," she said, "we find those documents. Because a man who kept records the way you describe your husband kept them did not have you sign a stack of sealed legal papers in 2020 for no reason." She wrote something down. "Where would he have kept them?" "His filing cabinet," I said, "in the back office. It's still locked. I never had the heart to open it." "Open it," Vivian said gently. "It's time. I'll tell you what I found in that cabinet in a little while. Because before I opened it, something else broke wide open, and it changed this from my private fight into something much bigger. While Vivian worked the legal side, I needed to understand the money, where the $850,000 went. And for that, Vivian sent me to a forensic accountant named Calvin Reese, a serious young man who wore his reading glasses on a chain like somebody's grandmother, and who could look at a bank statement the way I used to look at a patient's chart and tell you exactly where the sickness was. Calvin traced the money in about 10 days, and what he found split it 3 ways. Roughly $300,000 had gone to pay off debts, credit lines, a business loan things in Gerald's name. Another chunk, close to $200,000, had gone straight into paying down a mortgage on Renata and Gerald's own house, which I would later learn was weeks from foreclosure. And the rest, this is the part that turned my stomach. The rest had been paid in tidy monthly pieces to a company called Cornerstone Legacy Advisors. "That's an advisory firm," Calvin said. "Financial management estate consulting. The fees coming out of your refinance are enormous, Mrs. Ellison. Way beyond anything legitimate. And the sole principal of Cornerstone Legacy Advisors is a man named Douglas Fairmont. Fairmont. The wonderful Mr. Fairmont from Gerald's mother's church. The one Renata said handles estates like this all the time." That phrase had been sitting in the back of my mind like a stone in a shoe. He handles estates like this all the time. And Calvin, when I said it out loud, looked up at me over those grandmother glasses and said the words that changed everything. "Mrs. Ellison, he does. Let me show you something. Here is the first thing I did not see coming. I had assumed my daughter was the mind behind this. That greed had gotten into Renata, and she'd gone looking for a way to take what was mine. I was wrong. She wasn't the architect. She was the tool. Calvin had pulled the public record on Douglas Fairmont and Cornerstone Legacy Advisors, and there was a pattern in it as clear as a fingerprint. Over 6 years, Fairmont had positioned himself the exact same way through churches, through funerals, through the grief of families in black neighborhoods on the south and west sides, and attached himself to elderly widows who were sitting on paid-off property. Property their husbands had spent a lifetime building. There'd been a woman in Chatham, a woman in Austin, a woman in Woodlawn, 81 years old, who'd signed a power of attorney to a nephew Fairmont had gotten to first, and who'd lost her building and died in a rented room. He didn't find rich people. He found our people. He found women exactly like me, house-rich cash, modest, freshly widowed, raised to trust the church and to trust family and to not make a fuss. He found the weak point in a family, a Renata drowning in debt, terrified, easy to whisper to, and he turned that person into the knife. He never held the knife himself. He just sharpened it, aimed it, and collected his fees. My daughter hadn't come up with this. Douglas Fairmont had come to her at her lowest and offered her a way out of her fear, and she'd taken it and told herself a story about it and used it on me. That was the moment my fight stopped being only about me, because I realized that if I simply revoked my power of attorney and quietly clawed back my money, Douglas Fairmont would shake it off and go find the next widow, the next Miss Odessa with a paid-off 3 flat and nobody watching. And I would have used my paper to save myself and left the door wide open behind me. Sonny's voice again. Our people stay housed. No, I wasn't just going to protect my buildings. I was going to take this man's whole operation apart. And I was going to do it so carefully, so quietly, and so completely that he'd never see me coming, because I was just a confused old woman, wasn't I? That was the beauty of it. Being underestimated is a kind of camouflage, and Fairmont and my daughter had wrapped me in it themselves. Calvin taught me how to build a case that would survive a courtroom. Certified copies, not printouts. Bank records with dates and stamps. Everything logged, everything backed up. Nothing that could be waved away as an old woman's confusion. I bought a fireproof box. I kept it in Loretta's house, not mine. And every Sunday I want you to sit with this. Every single Sunday I still had Renata over. I made her tea. I asked about the grandkids. I let her pat my hand and call me forgetful. And after she left, I drove to Loretta's, and I added another certified document to the box. Cold, I know, but I wasn't raised to be cruel. I was raised to be patient. And there is a difference between the two that my daughter had forgotten and was about to remember. Now for the second thing I did not see coming, and this one I'm still not sure I deserved. Imani. My granddaughter had been away at law school through all of this, knowing nothing. But she was home for a weekend in December, staying at her parents' house, and she went looking for a phone charger in her father's home office. And in a drawer that should have held pens and staples, she found paperwork. Cornerstone Legacy Advisors. Statements. A copy of a durable power of attorney with her grandmother's shaky signature on it, and a handwritten note in Fairmont's hand with a number on it, and 3 words that she said she'd never forget, before the mother finds out. Imani was 23 years old and 1 semester into learning what a fiduciary duty is. She understood exactly what she was looking at, and she had to make a choice standing right there in her father's office holding papers that could destroy her own mother. She could put them back in the drawer, walk away, and keep her family whole in the only way she'd ever known it. Or she could pick up the phone and call the grandmother who'd once spent 3 hours showing her how to carry a good tenant through a bad year. She called me that night. I remember every word. She said, "Grandma, I need you to tell me the truth, and I need you to not protect me from it. Do you know what Mom did? And I made a choice, too, in that moment. I could have lied to protect her from her mother. I decided she was too much like me to be protected from anything. So I told her everything." There was a long silence on the line. Then my granddaughter, my baby's baby, said in a voice that had gone very old very fast, "Okay, tell me what you need, because whatever this is, I'm not on the wrong side of it. I'm on yours." I want to be honest about what that cost her, because the story doesn't work if I pretend it was easy. Imani did not stop loving her mother. She cried about it more than I ever did. She was choosing between 2 women she loved, and there is no clean way to do that, and I have thanked God every day since that she chose the way she did. She became my eyes and my ears inside a house I could no longer enter. She saw the emails. She saw the calendar. She saw them planning the next move before I could have known it any other way. And in the middle of January, Imani called me with the 2 pieces of information that told me exactly how much danger I was in, and exactly why Renata's plan couldn't stop with a simple refinance. The first was the why. Imani had finally gotten her mother to break down and talk one late night, the way daughters and mothers do. Gerald's restaurants hadn't just failed, they'd failed catastrophically, personally guaranteed, and on top of it, Gerald's mother was dying in hospice with bills nobody could pay. Fairmont had found Renata at the exact bottom of that pit and lowered down a rope. "Just borrow against your mother's building. She's got 4 of them. She'll never miss it. You'll pay it back before she even understands what a trust is. You're not hurting her. You're just moving money that's coming to you anyway." And my terrified daughter had grabbed that rope and told herself it was a loan. Told herself she was a good person in a bad spot. Told herself she'd make it right. It didn't make me forgive her, but it made her a person again instead of a monster. A weak, frightened, cornered person who did a monstrous thing. And you'll see why that mattered before we're done. The second piece of information from Imani was not soft at all. It was this: Fairmont and Renata had realized that the power of attorney wasn't enough, because as long as I was competent, I could take it back any day I chose. So they had begun very quietly to build a different kind of file, a file of dates and incidents and worried observations, a file designed to prove to a judge that Phoebe Ellison had lost her mind. They were going to have me declared incompetent, and they were bringing a doctor to do it. They'd stopped watching me because they thought I was harmless. And in that same blindness, they never once considered that the confused old woman they were building a case against had already opened her husband's filing cabinet and found what he'd left her there. I did open my husband's filing cabinet. I want to tell you what was in it, but I can't yet, and neither could I not really that day. Because sitting on top of the neat rows of folders was a plain white envelope with my name on it in Sonny's handwriting, and across the seal in that same careful hand he'd written, "Do not open until you are sitting in a lawyer's office with our trust papers in front of you. Trust me one more time, Phoebe. S." 45 years I trusted that man. I wasn't going to stop 3 weeks after signing his name into an envelope. So I did the hardest thing a grieving widow can do. I set my dead husband's letter down unopened, and I made myself wait. All I let myself take from that cabinet was a business card paper clipped beneath the envelope, a card for the trust department of a bank downtown. I called them. A very polite officer confirmed only this: yes, Mr. Cornelius Ellison had established a trust with them some years back, and yes, they would need to sit down with me to review it in full. That was all I knew going into the fight. That there was a wall somewhere and my husband had built it, and I wouldn't see its true shape until the very end. Vivian's strategy was built around that not knowing. "We don't reveal anything piecemeal," she told me. "We don't warn them, we don't threaten, we don't tip a single card. We gather everything: the revocation, the amended trust, Calvin's money trail, the Fairmont file, and whatever your husband left in that bank, and we put it all on one table in one room at one time. You only get to spring a trap once, Mrs. Ellison, so we spring it clean." So that's what we did quietly all through that winter. I signed the revocation of the power of attorney in Vivian's office, notarized effective immediately. From that moment, my daughter's legal authority over me was dead. She just didn't know it yet, because she had no new transaction in front of her to bounce off the wall. Vivian served it quietly on the banks, so Renata couldn't do one more dollar of damage. I signed a new amendment to the revocable trust restoring Dexter and my grandchildren, removing Renata as trustee entirely. And Vivian packaged the Fairmont evidence, Calvin's trail, the pattern of widows, the whole rotten history of Cornerstone Legacy Advisors, into a complaint ready to file with the Illinois Securities Department and the Attorney General's Elder Justice Division the moment I gave the word. Everything loaded, nothing fired, waiting. There was one bad night in February when the whole thing nearly came apart. Renata got suspicious. Not of me, she still thought I was harmless, but she sensed a leak. Money had a way of not moving as smoothly as Fairmont had promised, and she started to feel watched. And one evening, she picked up Imani's phone off the counter and saw a text thread. My name in it. Something about the box at Miss Loretta's. Imani called me that night in tears, whispering from her old bedroom. "She saw it, Grandma. She didn't see much, but she saw your name and she saw Loretta's. She's asking me what's going on." Now here is where I need you to understand the difference between panicking and thinking. A panicking woman confesses or runs or calls it all off. I did none of those. I sat down at my own kitchen table in the dark, and I asked myself, what do I want Renata to believe? And the answer was, I wanted her looking the wrong way. So the next morning I called my daughter and I let my voice shake and I told her a lie wrapped around a piece of the truth. I said, baby, I have to tell you something and I'm ashamed of it. Loretta's been in my ear. She found out about the money on the building and she's got me all worked up talking about lawyers saying I should sue the bank to get every dollar back. I don't want to do that. I don't understand any of it, but she keeps a box of papers and she won't let it go. I told Amani to help me understand what Loretta's even talking about. Do you see what I did? I gave Renata a threat she could handle. A confused old woman egged on by a meddling friend planning to chase cash, the $850,000, through a lawsuit against the bank. So Renata spent the next 6 weeks defending the wrong flank entirely. She and Fairmont braced for a fight over money that was already spent. They never once looked at the buildings. They never once imagined that the real war was over the property and the trust in a sealed envelope in a bank downtown. I fed my daughter the fear I wanted her to have, and she ate it because it fit the story she'd already decided to believe about me. Now I have to tell you about the worst afternoon of my life. Worse than the refinance. In some ways worse than the day I buried Sonny, because on the day I buried Sonny, at least my child stood beside me and grieved. It was a Sunday in March. Renata called and said the family was going to come by and check on me, which they never did altogether anymore, so I knew something was coming. I just didn't know what shape it would take. They arrived a little after 2. Renata and Gerald and Dexter flown in from Atlanta, which told me how serious this was. And one more person. A man in a soft gray sweater with a leather folio under his arm, whom Renata introduced as Dr. Alan Whitfield, a friend of Mr. Fairmont's, who just wants to make sure you're doing okay, Mama. A doctor. In my living room, on a Sunday. I understood the whole thing in about 4 seconds. This was the file they were building, the file to prove I'd lost my mind. This friendly visit was a competency evaluation staged in my own home with witnesses, so that a judge would one day read a doctor's note and a daughter's worried testimony and declare that Phoebe Ellison could no longer be trusted with her own life. That's the piece they still needed, because as long as I was competent, I could revoke that power of attorney any day I chose, which of course I already had in secret. They were building a case to stop me from doing the very thing I'd already done. The irony of it nearly made me laugh. I didn't. I had a part to play. So the doctor asked his gentle, terrible questions. What year is it, Mrs. Ellison? Do you know who the president is? Can you tell me what you had for breakfast? And this is the one that Renata leaned forward for. Do you understand your finances? Mrs. Ellison, do you know how your bills get paid? Do you remember signing documents last spring? And I performed. God forgive me, I performed the part they'd written for me. I let my eyes go soft and lost. I said, oh, my Renata handles all that. She's so good to me. I don't worry about the money, I just leave it to her. I fumbled the date by a year and let Renata gently correct me. I called Dexter by his father's name once on purpose and watched my daughter's face fill up with what I'm sure she told herself was concern. Every second of it was a knife. My own child sitting in my living room coaching a stranger to certify me as broken and looking the whole time so tender. It's okay, Mama. Take your time, Mama. We just want to protect you. That word again. Protect. The same word Sonny used in 2020 for the envelope I hadn't opened. The same word Renata used at my kitchen table with her cheerful little flags. My whole life, the people who loved me protected me. And now the word had been turned into a weapon and pointed at my mind. Dexter wouldn't look at me. He sat in the corner, my faraway son staring at his hands, and I understood that he didn't know the whole of it, and didn't want to, that he'd flown in to support his sister, and was already sick with the something wrong of it, but too much of a coward to ask. I didn't hate him for it. I filed it away. Only one person in that room knew I was acting. Loretta had come over to keep me company, and she sat beside me on the couch, and at the exact moment I thought I might break, when the doctor asked me very kindly whether I ever got confused about where I was, Loretta reached over and took my hand down low out of sight and squeezed it once. Hard. And that squeeze said everything my best friend of 44 years needed to say. Hold. You're not confused. You're the sharpest one in this room. Hold. And I held. I want to tell you what it takes to sit in your own home and let people you love build a lie that you are less than human, and to help them do it, and to smile. It takes a kind of strength I didn't know I had until that afternoon. Anybody can fight when fighting feels good. It's a whole other thing to lose on purpose in front of witnesses, because you can see 3 moves further down the board than the people beating you. They left around 5, satisfied. Dr. Whitfield shook my hand and told me I was doing just fine, all things considered. Renata hugged me at the door and whispered that she loved me and that she'd take care of everything. I didn't have to worry about a thing. I know you will, baby, I said. You've got it all handled. And here is the move I'd been setting up the whole afternoon. As she was leaving, I let myself get a little teary and confused, and I said, Renata, Loretta keeps saying I can't take care of this big house by myself anymore, and maybe she's right. Maybe I'm not up to it. Maybe I should let you handle finding me one of those nice places. Whatever papers I need to sign to make it simple for everybody, I'll sign them. I just want it easy. I'm tired, baby. My daughter's whole face opened up like sunrise. This was everything she wanted handed to her by my own trembling hand. Me agreeing to be moved out and signed over voluntarily. No messy guardianship fight needed. Just Mama giving up. Of course, Mama, she said, and I could hear her already spending it. I'll set it all up. There's an office we can go to get everything signed at once. I'll bring Mr. Fairmont. He'll make it painless. Bring everybody, I said. Let's just get it all done in one room. In one room. Vivian's words out of my mouth, and my daughter thanked me for them. She thought she was coming to sign me away. She was coming to sign for what she'd done. The meeting was on a Thursday morning in April in a conference room on the 14th floor of a downtown office building. Renata had arranged it herself, thinking she was arranging my surrender. She walked in like she already owned the room, and in her mind she did. Gerald came with her tight around the eyes. And Douglas Fairmont, I was seeing him in person for the first time, glided in behind them in a beautiful suit, all warmth and teeth, carrying that leather folio like a preacher carries a Bible. He shook my hand and told me what a wise decision I was making, how much easier everything would be now. Dexter came too quiet, guilty, not sure why he was there. Renata had told them all the same thing. Mama's finally agreed to sign everything over and move into a home. Come make it official. What Renata didn't know was that the room wasn't hers. It was Vivian's. And beside Vivian sat a silver-haired gentleman I'd only spoken to on the phone, the officer from the bank's trust department. And in front of him in a folder sat papers my daughter had never seen and never imagined. Renata sat down and reached for a pen, cheerful, ready. So, Mama, where do we start? Vivian answered before I could. We start, she said, with a few corrections to the record, and I watched my daughter's face begin to change. Vivian laid it out flat and calm, 1 page at a time. First, the durable power of attorney Renata had been operating under was revoked weeks ago. Notarized, served on the bank's dead. She hadn't had the legal authority to sign my name to a grocery list since February and hadn't known it. Second, the trust amendment that made her sole trustee had itself been amended, restoring Dexter and the grandchildren, removing her entirely. Renata's mouth opened. That's Mama, you're confused, you don't understand what you... She understands perfectly, Vivian said. In fact, Mrs. Ellison would like the doctor's evaluation from last month entered as evidence that she was tested for competency in her own home with witnesses, and as you can all now see, found to be entirely formidably sound of mind. The room went very quiet. Fairmont's smile flickered the first crack in it. He was starting to understand that he was not in the room he thought he was in. But Renata still had 1 card, and she played it, her voice climbing. Fine, fine. But you can't undo what's done. The building's already refinanced. That money's spent. You can revoke whatever you want. You're still going to lose the buildings. That was when the man from the bank cleared his throat. "Mrs. Boyd," he said gently, "I think there's been a misunderstanding about what your parents actually owned." He opened his folder, and he explained in the mild voice of a man who has delivered difficult news to 100 families, the thing that none of them knew. The thing I myself did not fully know until that moment. In the spring of 2020, Cornelius Ellison had come to that bank and established an irrevocable trust. And into it he had placed the 3 apartment buildings on Martin Luther King Drive, the heart of everything $3.5 million of it. Not the revocable trust Renata had raided. A separate irrevocable one, with the bank itself serving as trustee. I had signed it, that thick stack of papers, in 2020, the ones I never read, the ones he said were for my protection. I hadn't been signing away anything. I'd been building a vault. An irrevocable trust of this kind, the officer said, is not controlled by the beneficiary, and it cannot be reached by a power of attorney. Mrs. Boyd, the 3 King Drive buildings were never your mother's to sign, and therefore never yours to take. They have been held by this bank untouched the entire time. The only property your authority could reach was the commercial building on 47th Street, which sits in the revocable trust. That is the one and the only one that was refinanced. I watched it land on my daughter. I watched her understand that the empire she thought she'd captured had never been in the field at all. That her whole scheme, all of it, every lie and every flag and every tender word, had only ever reached 1 building out of 4. That the man she'd tried to outmaneuver had walled off the crown jewels 5 years before she made her first move, and that the wall had gone up the very same season she'd later come whispering. Renata sat back like she'd been pushed. Fairmont was already gathering his folio, already calculating his exit. He would find on his way out that Vivian had a second envelope for him, a copy of the complaint about to be filed with the Illinois Securities Department and the Attorney General. But that comes in a moment, because the bank officer wasn't finished. He reached into his folder one more time and he took out a plain white envelope and he slid it across the table to me. "Mr. Ellison left instructions," he said quietly, "that this be given to you in a lawyer's office, with the trust papers in front of you." He was very specific. It was the envelope from the filing cabinet, my name in Sonny's hand. I'd carried it in my purse for weeks, unopened, honoring a dead man's instruction. And now I was sitting exactly where he'd told me I'd have to be sitting before I was allowed to read it. My hands were not steady when I opened it. I'll be honest about that. The whole room fell away. It was 1 page. His handwriting a little shaky already in 2020 when the first tests were coming back, and he wasn't telling me yet how scared he was. It said, "Phoebe, if you're reading this in a lawyer's office, then someone you love did the thing I prayed they wouldn't. I couldn't stop their weakness, but I could put a wall around your life that no signature can knock down. The buildings were never the inheritance, baby. You were. Keep the paper right." I did. Sonny. And that was when I cried. Not before. Not through the refinance. Not through the doctor and his terrible gentle questions. Not through a winter of making tea for the daughter who was robbing me. I hadn't given them a single tear. But sitting in that conference room, I put my head down and I wept because for 7 months I had believed I was fighting this alone, a foolish old woman who'd signed away her life scrambling in the dark to save herself. And I hadn't been alone. Not for 1 day of it. My husband had seen this coming from inside his own dying. He couldn't fix his daughter. He couldn't take her fear away, or Gerald's debt, or the weakness that would one day put a pen in her hand at my kitchen table. But he could do the one thing he'd done his whole life. He could keep the paper right. He'd built me a wall out of paper and love, and a filing cabinet he guarded like it was the most precious thing he owned, and then he'd waited folded up in an envelope 5 years to reach across death and hold my hand in the exact moment I'd need it most. The buildings were never the inheritance. You were. Imani was there, I haven't said, but she'd come and she was standing behind my chair and she put both her hands on my shoulders while I cried and she didn't say a word. It was Renata who broke the silence, and when she did, the whole thing finally came out of her. "Mama, Her voice cracked into pieces. "The restaurants failed. All of them. Personally guaranteed we were going to lose the house. And then Gerald's mother got sick, and there was no money for the hospice, none. And Fairmont said he said you had 4 buildings you'd never even notice. He said I could put it back before you understood. I told myself it was a loan. I told myself I'd fix it before you ever—" She was sobbing now. "I never wanted to take it from you. I just got so scared. I got so scared, Mama." And there it was. Not a monster. A frightened woman cornered by her own life and hunted by a man who made a living finding frightened people. It didn't excuse one thing she'd done, but it turned her back into my daughter sitting there wrecked, and something in me that I thought had gone cold for good turned over one more time. I wiped my face. I folded Sonny's letter and put it back in my purse close to me, and then I did what I'd come to do, not to wound her, to close it. I told them plainly how it would be. The King Drive buildings were safe and always had been. The 47th Street refinance was legally valid. Renata had held a real power of attorney when she signed it, but using it to enrich herself was a breach of her duty to me, and I would be suing her and Fairmont to recover every dollar of the $850,000. Fairmont, in addition, was now a matter for the state and for the other families he'd done this to, the women in Chatham and Austin and Woodlawn, who would be getting a phone call. And Gerald's mother, I looked at Gerald when I said this, Gerald's mother would have her hospice paid. By me, directly, not through Renata, not as a favor to anyone, but because that old woman was dying, and it was the right thing to do, and I would not let my daughter's sin cost a dying woman her dignity. Then I looked at Renata, my baby girl, for what I knew would be the last time for a long, long while. "You didn't lose the money, Renata," I said. "You lost the one person who'd have given it to you if you'd only asked. That's the inheritance you spent." People ask me when they hear this story whether it felt good. Winning. Watching that man gather his beautiful leather folio and walk out of that room into an investigation he'll be answering to for years. Watching my daughter understand finally exactly who she'd underestimated. And the honest answer is no. It didn't feel good. It felt like closing a door on a house that used to be warm. But I didn't build any of it to feel good. I built it to make it right. And there's a difference between those two things that my whole life had been trying to teach me, and that I only really learned at 67 in a conference room holding my dead husband's handwriting. Here is what I did with what Sonny saved. I took the 3 King Drive buildings out of the Quiet Bank Trust, and I put them into a new one with teeth, this time the Ellison Family Housing Trust. It's written so that those buildings can never be sold out from under the people who live in them, and the rents can never be jacked up to chase somebody's grandmother out of the only home she's known for 40 years. Miss Odessa's rent is still marked paid, and now it always will be long after I'm gone, whether anybody remembers why or not. Our people stay housed. Sonny put that in writing, and so did I, and paper outlives people. He taught me that. The $850,000 we recovered most of in time through the courts. It wasn't clean, and it wasn't quick, and it meant sitting in a courtroom across an aisle from my own child, which is a thing I hope none of you ever have to do. But we got it back, and I didn't spend it on myself. I started a scholarship in Cornelius Ellison's name for young people from the South Side who want to study law, because I had learned the hard way that the difference between a family that gets protected and a family that gets picked apart is very often just whether anybody in it knows how to read the fine print. The first scholarship went to Imani. She's specializing in elder law now. Says she wants to spend her career finding the Douglas Fairmonts before they find the next widow. She chose her grandmother over her mother in the worst week of her life at 23 years old, and she has never once asked me to tell her she did the right thing, which is exactly how I know she did. As for Renata, I want to be careful here because I know how you want this to end. You want the phone call. The tears the Sunday dinner where we all come back together and grief turns to grace. Real life doesn't hand you that on a schedule, and I won't lie to you and say it did. Renata is in therapy. She's paying me back slowly on a plan the lawyers drew up, and every payment is a small hard apology neither of us knows how to say out loud. Gerald's mother passed that summer in a good hospice without pain with her bills quiet, and Renata knows who made sure of that, and I think it's the one thing she can't yet look at directly. We are not healed. We may not be in whatever time I have left. But the door isn't shut all the way. I left it open a crack on purpose, the way you leave a light on for someone who might find their way home late. That crack is not for her. It's for me. Because I refuse to let what she did turn me into someone who could close a door on her own child forever. So that's the whole of it. That's how a foolish old woman who signed without reading got taken for one building and kept the other 3, and her name and her mind and her husband's last words to her. All because that man loved her enough to keep the paper right. They read the will. I wrote the ending. They say the meek inherit the earth. Maybe, but the ones who read the fine print, we get to keep it.